All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're plunging headfirst into the dark, incredibly atmospheric folklore of Shatranj Garh. We're looking at a deeply fascinating story that really digs into the heavy price of past mistakes, but told through this chilling supernatural lens. The whole narrative centers around King Taramal. Now, he was a ruler known far and wide for his power and his strict sense of justice. But as you'll see, in folklore, justice has a funny way of taking a terrifying karmic turn. What we've got here is a genuinely harrowing tale of a haunted kingdom, a vengeful spirit, and a father pushed to the absolute brink.
So you really have to ask, what happens when a king's dark past literally comes back to claim his future? This is the massive crisis that kicks everything off. King Taramal has this one single heir, Prince Arnav, and he loves this kid more than life itself. But out of nowhere, the young prince just starts wasting away. He's suddenly hollow-eyed, totally lifeless, just sitting in isolation day and night. And when they finally get him to speak, Arnav says a mysterious Banjaran, a nomadic woman, is calling him to the grave. He keeps hearing this terrifying voice promising to take him away. It's such a visceral hook, right? It tells us immediately that we aren't dealing with some regular sickness. This is a full-on supernatural siege.
And let me tell you, things escalate with horrifying speed. The palace doesn't just get a little spooky, it plunges into absolute paralyzing terror almost overnight. It all starts with this undisclosed incident in the jungle, and then, boom, the dominoes fall. The prince starts having these intense hallucinations. That directly leads to the king's own mother literally dying of sheer fright just from hearing the witch's voice echo in the halls. Right after that, the queen herself drops dead under frankly horrifying circumstances that we'll get into in a second. And the final blow, the prince becomes fully possessed. The pacing here is just relentless. It perfectly maps out how fast a powerful family can be utterly destroyed. Okay, so to stop this absolute nightmare, the king calls in a Maharshi. This is a highly revered sage, famous for his divine vision. And his entrance, it's intense. The very moment he steps foot into the palace, the flames on all the torches inexplicably flare up, burning wild and bright. He walks straight up to Prince Arnav, checks his pulse, and his face just instantly drops. The diagnosis is brutal. He confirms to the king that this is no ordinary disease. It's a dark, supernatural possession. Something incredibly evil has latched onto the boy, and it is not going to let go without a serious fight.
But here's the twist. The Maharshi doesn't just hand over a magical cure. He demands a confession. He looks King Taramal dead in the eye and tells him that the only thing that can possibly save his son's life is the absolute truth. He demands the king reveal a recent deadly sin, specifically an event where he took a life with his own hands. And this is where the story brilliantly pivots, right? It goes from being a standard ghost story to this really complex psychological tale of guilt. The king is hesitant at first, obviously, but he's finally forced to confront this horrific secret he thought he had buried deep in the jungle.
Which brings us to the flashback, the actual genesis of this whole curse. The king breaks down and confesses. He says that during a recent midnight hunt, he was galloping through this dense, pitch-black forest, chasing a black leopard. He draws his bow, aims into the darkness, and lets the arrow fly. But instead of the thud of a beast, he hears a human scream. He pushes through the underbrush, and there he finds a fierce Banjaran woman. But the real horror? It was in her arms. The king's arrow had completely missed the cat and accidentally struck and killed her infant child. In just a fraction of a second, a routine royal hunt turned into a tragedy you just can't undo. Obviously, the king is horrified. He begs for forgiveness, swearing it was a complete accident. But the grieving mother, she is consumed by this unimaginable, earth-shattering rage. Right in front of his eyes, she transforms into a vengeful witch, a Daayan. Her eyes literally start burning like hot coals, and she screams this chilling vow, blood for blood, child for child. She tells him that just as she has to watch her child suffer and die, he is going to watch his child suffer. And then she single-handedly slaughters his entire royal hunting party. She kills everyone but the king, specifically leaving him alive so he has to endure the absolute agony of watching his bloodline be slowly eradicated.
Now, this right here is the emotional core of the whole explainer. We aren't just looking at some one-dimensional monster movie. We're looking at this deeply tragic parallel between two utterly desperate parents. On one side, you've got King Taramal, terrified, desperate, willing to do anything to save his living son from this gruesome fate. And on the exact opposite side, you have the Banjaran Daayan, totally consumed and broken by the violent loss of her murdered baby. Both of them are completely driven by the deepest parental bonds imaginable,
but they are trapped in this devastating, endless cycle of vengeance. It totally grounds the horror in profound, real-world emotional pain. So, what did the king find when he finally stumbled back to the palace after that bloodbath? He ran into his royal chambers, only to find his wife, the queen, collapsed dead on the stone floor. Her breathing had stopped, and her eyes had rolled back, turning pure milky white. But the nightmare wasn't over. Her lifeless body was temporarily possessed by the Daayan just to deliver one final taunting message. Speaking through his dead wife's lips, the witch told the king to save his tears for his son. She swore she was coming back to take the prince on Amavasya. That's the night of the new moon, a time in local folklore when dark magic is at its absolute peak and spirits are completely unchained. With this Amavasya deadline rapidly approaching, the Maharshi lays out this incredibly perilous, high-stakes plan. It's the only way to break the curse. Step 1, the king has to go back into that cursed jungle, completely unprotected, before midnight. Step 2, he has to somehow locate and exhume the grave of the murdered child. Step 3, he has to physically carry that infant's skeleton all the way back to the palace. The Maharshi makes it crystal clear. This is the one and only shot they have to save the boy. The sheer danger of this plan just cranks the tension up to 11. So the new moon night finally arrives. It's pitch black. The king takes just one single, absolutely terrified servant, and they head deep into the jungle. Eventually, they find the tiny grave, packed tight with earth. The servant is literally paralyzed by fear. He can't even move. So the king, the ruler of the realm, gets down in the dirt on his hands and knees and starts clawing through the rotting soil himself. A foul, overwhelming stench hits them as the earth opens up. Finally, his bare hands brush against the dry, fragile bones of the baby he accidentally killed. He wraps them up and sprints back toward the palace as fast as he can. While that's happening in the dirt, the climax is exploding back at the palace. The Maharshi is desperately trying to prepare the room, but suddenly Prince Arnav starts violently convulsing, screaming that she is here. The temperature in the room just plummets. Then you hear it, the terrifying rhythmic sound of gungrus, those traditional metallic ankle bells echoing slowly down the stone hallway, getting closer and closer. A massive shadow falls across the doorway. The Daayan is there. Her eyes are glowing blood red, her nails are elongated into literal claws. The prince collapses, and she lifts the boy right off the ground by his throat, seconds away from finishing her curse. And just as the witch's claws are about to sink in, King Taramal bursts through the doors. He violently thrusts the tiny, exhumed skeleton out in front of him and screams, "Stop! I swear by your dead child." And it works. The sheer shock of seeing her own baby's remains instantly paralyzes the Daayan. For just a fraction of a second, her glowing eyes well up with actual tears, before they immediately blaze with even more fury. But that split-second pause, that hesitation, that is exactly the window the Maharshi was waiting for. The king used the ultimate leverage, the very source of her immense grief, to stop the attack in its tracks. And that is when the Maharshi strikes. He immediately starts belting out these ancient, incredibly powerful mantras. He takes his Trushul, a sacred three-pronged trident, and just violently slams it into the stone floor. Instantly, a massive, blazing ring of fire erupts out of nowhere, completely trapping the witch inside and binding her spirit. The Daayan goes wild. She's thrashing, she's screaming, she's warning the sage that he can't hold her. But the holy fire and the chanting are too much. They literally begin tearing her supernatural form to pieces. The dark energy that was choking the prince is forcefully ripped out of him and just incinerated right there in the flames. But, even as she's being defeated, she completely refuses to give up. As her physical form dissolves into this thick, choking black smoke, the Daayan leaves King Taramal with one final, incredibly chilling threat. I will return when my tears dry. It's honestly such a brilliant narrative choice. It's a stark reminder that the immense, life-shattering pain the king caused can't just be magically wiped away by some ritual. Actions have deep, lasting consequences. The spirit might be bound for now, yes, but that grief and that simmering potential for vengeance is still out there. So, where does that leave everyone? Well, the immediate threat is over. Following the exorcism, Prince Arnav is completely cured. The dark shadow is totally lifted from his mind and his body. But King Taramal, he is a changed man. He fully recognizes the massive weight of his karma now. He takes the infant skeleton back to the jungle himself, and this time he respectfully, properly reburies it. And most importantly, he swears a solemn, unbreakable oath that he will never, ever hunt again.
He finally takes total responsibility for his actions, actively choosing to break that cycle of violence by laying down his weapons forever.
Which leaves us with a really unsettling question to wrap up on. The king learned his lesson, sure, and the immediate danger was neutralized, but remember, a mother's grief is infinite, and eventually tears do dry. Does just burying the bones actually bury the past? This folklore beautifully illustrates that while magic and rituals can definitely fight off a monster, true karma always demands a reckoning. It leaves you wondering about the absolute inescapability of our own actions, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the stories we tell, and I'll see you next time.